Emma's evening had started like any other. She had accompanied her husband Mark to a charity event downtown, expecting a few hours of polite conversation, some small talk with people she barely knew, and then a quiet ride home. But when the night ended, Mark was called back to the office for an urgent meeting, leaving her stranded in the city as the streets darkened and the chill of autumn settled in. She felt a flicker of frustration. She had not expected to be left alone, but mostly she felt a quiet unease, standing under the dim streetlights outside the hotel where the event had taken place. She wished she had planned her own way home. It was then that she saw him, Daniel, Mark's boss. He was speaking to a few colleagues near the valet stand, his posture calm and confident, his presence impossible to ignore. Emma had only met him a handful of times at office parties, always at a distance, always formal. He had a reputation for being serious and unapproachable, someone who commanded respect rather than warmth. Yet tonight he seemed different. The tired lines around his eyes softened when he saw her, and he stepped toward her with a polite, almost gentle nod. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying over the soft murmur of the departing crowd. "Need a ride?" She blinked, caught off guard. I wasn't expecting." "Don't worry about it," he interrupted with a small smile. "I was heading in your direction anyway. It's no trouble." Something in the calm certainty of his tone reassured her. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and curiosity. As she followed him to the car, she noticed how carefully he opened the door for her. The same careful attention he gave to everything he did. It felt strange, unfamiliar, and yet comforting. Once inside the car, the silence was immediate. The engine hummed as Daniel drove through the quiet streets, the city lights reflecting in the wet pavement from a light drizzle that had begun to fall. Emma kept her hands folded in her lap, unsure whether to speak. She stole a glance at him, noticing for the first time the subtle details, the sharpness of his jawline, the hint of gray at his temples, the way his eyes seemed both alert and tired at once. He didn't look like someone distant or untouchable tonight. He looked human, real, and somehow closer than she had ever imagined. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the sound of the tires on wet asphalt. Daniel's eyes met hers briefly. "I don't mind. Honestly, I could use the company." There was a sincerity in his tone, a quiet honesty that made her heart skip. She felt a flutter she didn't expect, a tension that wasn't unpleasant, and quickly reminded herself to focus on the ride home rather than on the strange, unspoken energy between them. The conversation began with small talk, as polite as any interaction at a formal event. Emma mentioned the charity, the speeches, the food. Daniel nodded, commenting on the event with careful thought. But his attention felt different from the casual courtesy of strangers. He asked her about her evening, her family, her work, and her dreams. At first, she thought it was just polite curiosity. But the questions carried depth, a genuine interest that made her pause. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt seen, not in the way that acquaintances notice someone's dress or smile, but in the way someone notices who you are beneath the surface. She felt a flicker of warmth, a sense of recognition she hadn't experienced in years. The city streets blurred past, the rain tapping lightly on the windshield, creating a cocoon around them, and with each passing moment, she found herself more drawn into the unexpected intimacy of the drive. She thought about Mark, how he worked late, how he often came home exhausted and distracted. She loved him, of course, but lately she had felt a growing distance between them. There were conversations left unsaid, frustrations quietly simmering, moments of longing she had tucked away. And now, sitting beside Daniel, she realized how starved she had been for simple, undivided attention, for someone who asked about her heart rather than her schedule. As the car turned onto quieter streets, she noticed Daniel's hands on the wheel, steady, confident, yet gentle. There was a calm assurance in him, a sense of responsibility carried without arrogance. She wondered briefly how her husband had never shared this side of his boss with her. Maybe it was the context. Maybe Daniel only showed this side to those he trusted. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling of safety, The warmth of someone's attention and the strange, unspoken connection that was forming in this short, simple ride home. A streetlight flickered overhead, and Emma realized she had been holding her breath. She looked down for a moment, then back at Daniel. He caught her gaze, and there was a faint smile on his lips, acknowledging the unspoken thoughts, the tension, the strange electricity of the moment. He didn't say anything, and she didn't either. Words felt unnecessary. The quiet understanding between them was enough for now. A fragile but potent thread connecting to people who should have nothing in common yet felt like they had met at the exact right moment. The drive continued, each passing block reinforcing the sense of something significant happening, though neither would dare name it. Emma's thoughts swirled between guilt, surprise, curiosity, and an unfamiliar excitement. She felt exposed in the way one feels when a window to their heart is opened without warning. And Daniel, for his part, seemed equally present, equally aware of the tension, but respectful. Careful not to overstep as they approached the turn leading to her street, Emma's pulse quickened. The ride was almost over, yet she didn't want it to end. There was a strange intimacy in the shared silence, the mutual recognition of unspoken needs. The gentle hum of the car engine acting as a soundtrack to emotions neither of them had fully acknowledged. Daniel slowed the car, coming to a stop outside her home. He looked at her, the faintest shadow of a smile playing on his lips. "Here we are," he said softly. Emma hesitated before opening the door. A mixture of relief, longing, and confusion swirling inside her. She wanted to say more, to linger in the moment, but the words wouldn't come. She simply nodded, murmured a quiet thanks, and stepped out into the gentle rain. As Daniel drove away, Emma stood on the porch, drenched in both rain and thought. The world felt different. Now something had shifted, something delicate and powerful. She didn't know what it meant yet, only that she would never forget this night, this ride, or the quiet connection that had taken root in the unlikeliest of places. The drive after the initial awkwardness settled into a quiet rhythm. Emma watched the city blur past, the lights reflecting on the wet streets, the occasional honk of a distant car punctuating the soft hum of the engine. At first, she tried to focus on the scenery, telling herself to keep the evening simple, to avoid reading too much into what had already happened. But Daniel's presence made that impossible. He seemed calm, confident, and attentive. As though the night itself had slowed down to make room for the conversation, he was gently coaxing out of her. "You don't get out much on your own," he said suddenly, breaking the silence, his voice low but steady. There was no judgment in it, only observation. Emma chuckled softly, a little embarrassed. "I guess not. Most nights I'm at home catching up on laundry or dinner, or waiting for Mark to come back from work." She trailed off, unsure why she was telling him so much, yet feeling the need to fill the space between them with honesty rather than empty words. Daniel glanced at her, his expression unreadable at first, then softened. "It must be lonely sometimes." The word struck her like a small spark. Lonely. She had never admitted it to anyone, not even Mark, who was often too wrapped up in his own work to notice. "Sometimes," she said quietly, her gaze dropping to her hands folded in her lap. "I mean, it's not terrible. I have friends, family, but it can get quiet, too quiet." The way he listened, really listened, made her heart stir. There was no rush, no judgment, just a steady attention that drew her out. She found herself talking more freely than she had in years, sharing fragments of her life that she had tucked away, stories she hadn't thought were worth mentioning. "I used to paint," she confessed, her voice catching slightly. "Watercolors mostly. But somewhere along the way, I stopped. Life got busy, you know? Responsibilities, work, Mark's career. It just faded into the background." Daniel nodded slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "That's a shame. You should never stop doing the things that make you feel alive." There was a gentle insistence in his tone, a conviction that made her feel seen in a way that surprised her. She had always thought Mark noticed the practical parts of her life, her support, her patience, but here was someone noticing her dreams, her desires, her quiet passions. For a moment, Emma felt a pang of guilt. She loved her husband truly. But the stark contrast between the attention Daniel was giving her and the neglect she sometimes felt from Mark was impossible to ignore. She tried to push the feeling away, but it lingered, a quiet tension she could neither name nor dismiss. They drove in silence for a few moments, letting the city lights pass like fleeting thoughts. Emma stared out the window, tracing the reflections of neon signs in the puddles on the road. She noticed how Daniel's hand rested lightly on the steering wheel. His posture relaxed but purposeful. There was a quiet strength about him, a balance of authority and gentleness that was disarming. She realized she had never paid this much attention to him before, never truly seen him beyond the formal, professional facade. "Do you ever feel like life just passes by?" she asked suddenly, almost whispering, unsure why the question left her lips. Daniel's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror. There was a pause, a brief hesitation, and then a quiet honesty. "Yes, sometimes I feel that way. But it's the small moments, the unexpected connections that make life feel real." Emma's heart thumped. There it was again, the sense that he understood her in a way no one else did. It wasn't just attraction. It was recognition, the kind that touches your soul quietly, gently, and lingers. She felt a flutter she hadn't expected, an awareness that this night, this ride, was shifting something inside her. She shared a little more, words spilling out in a rush she couldn't control. "I've missed feeling. Noticed, I guess, like someone really sees me. Not just the roles I play, wife, friend, organizer, but someone who sees me for who I am, all of it." Daniel nodded, his expression softening further. "I think everyone deserves to be seen like that. It shouldn't take a lifetime to find it." The sincerity in his voice made her swallow hard. She felt exposed, but in a safe way, as though she had stumbled into a rare honesty that had no consequences. The rain began to pick up, drumming softly against the windshield, adding a rhythm to their conversation. They spoke less and listened more, the silence carrying the weight of understanding between them. Each word, each glance seemed to layer meaning onto the drive, creating a fragile intimacy that was hard to ignore. Emma noticed the small things. How Daniel's eyes flicked to her when he asked a question, how he tilted his head slightly when listening, how carefully he avoided breaking the quiet that allowed her to speak freely. She realized that attention, the kind of attention she had longed for, could feel electric even in the absence of any physical touch. "You know," he said finally, breaking the silence again, "I admire people who keep their passions alive, even if only quietly. It takes courage to continue dreaming, even when life gets busy." Her chest tightened. The words felt personal, meant just for her. "I suppose I forgot how much I liked it," she admitted. "Painting, I mean. Not just the act itself, but the feeling it gave me, the way it let me exist in a different way." Daniel's smile was faint, thoughtful. "Then maybe it's time to pick it up again." Emma looked at him, unsure why his suggestion felt so meaningful. It wasn't just advice. It was recognition, encouragement, and a validation of a part of herself she had neglected. She felt a warmth spread through her, a quiet excitement that she couldn't quite name. For the first time in a long while, she felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with her daily routines or responsibilities. As the streets narrowed and familiar neighborhoods approached, Emma felt a pang of disappointment. She didn't want the ride to end, not because she had done anything wrong, but because this connection, this rare acknowledgement of who she truly was, felt like something precious, fleeting, and impossible to find again. Daniel noticed her glance toward the approaching turn. He gave a small, understanding smile, the kind that made her feel both comforted and vulnerable at the same time. "Almost there," he said softly. "But it's been good to talk." Emma nodded, feeling her heart twist with conflicting emotions: gratitude, longing, guilt, and a strange excitement. She didn't know what this night meant, only that it had shifted something inside her. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt understood, seen, and acknowledged in ways that went beyond casual conversation or polite smiles. And as the car rolled on, Carrying her closer to home, Emma knew that she wouldn't forget this ride, not the words, not the glances, not the quiet energy between them. Something had started here, something delicate, something unspoken, and it would linger in her mind long after the engine stopped. The rain had grown heavier now, drumming steadily against the car windows, the sound wrapping the small interior in a private rhythm. Emma felt the pulse of the storm outside as if it mirrored the pulse inside her chest, trepid, uncertain, yet alive. The city streets seemed quieter in this rain, the usual noises muffled, leaving only the hum of the engine and Daniel's steady driving. There was a tension between them now, subtle but undeniable, and Emma felt it in every glance, every movement. She tried to focus on the passing lights, on the blurred reflections of neon signs in the wet asphalt, but her mind kept returning to Daniel. He had been quiet for a few minutes, thoughtful, almost introspective, and she realized how much she had been drawn to him, not in a reckless or fleeting way, but in a deep, unsettling way that made her heart race. There was something about the way he listened, the way he seemed to notice not just her words but her emotions, that made her feel exposed in the safest possible way. "You seem quiet," Daniel said suddenly, his voice low, careful, as if testing the waters without breaking the fragile bubble of their shared moment. Emma swallowed, unsure how to respond. She had been quiet because she was thinking, because every word she might say seemed inadequate to express the mix of feelings swirling inside her. "I guess I've been thinking," she admitted softly. He glanced at her just briefly, and something in his eyes shifted to empathy. Understanding, maybe even curiosity. "About what?" he asked gently, steering the car through the slick streets. She hesitated, then let herself speak. "About life. About how things turn out, how fast time goes, and how little control we have sometimes. I feel like I've been living on autopilot." The words surprised her. She hadn't expected to voice them, yet saying them aloud lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Instead, he focused on the road, then glanced at her with a quiet intensity. "You're not alone in feeling that way. Most people live like that, trapped in routines, responsibilities, expectations. But few ever talk about it." Emma's chest tightened at his words. There was honesty there, a truth that resonated deeply. She wanted to agree to explain that she often felt invisible, unnoticed, and unappreciated, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she let the silence stretch between them. The kind of silence that holds meaning without needing explanation. The rain fell harder, creating streaks across the windshield, and the car's wipers worked steadily to keep the world outside clear. Inside, the atmosphere felt charged, electric in the quietest way. Emma noticed how Daniel's hands gripped the wheel, calm yet purposeful, how he seemed entirely present, entirely aware of her without needing to speak. It was a contrast to the way she often felt at home, her husband distracted, her own needs slipping quietly into the background. "I sometimes feel invisible," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The confession hung in the air, fragile, intimate, as if spoken too loudly might shatter it. Daniel's gaze met hers, and the sincerity in his eyes was disarming. "Invisible," he repeated softly, not questioning, just acknowledging. "That must be hard." Emma nodded, unsure why the words felt like a release. She had carried that loneliness quietly, tucked behind a smile, behind polite conversations, behind a life that appeared orderly on the surface. But here, in this car, with the rain falling outside and Daniel beside her, she felt a strange freedom in admitting it. She didn't have to hide. She didn't have to perform. She could just be herself, and someone was seeing her. "You deserve to be seen, Emma," Daniel said quietly. His tone wasn't flirtatious or commanding. It was gentle, steady, real. "Everyone deserves that. And you? You've been carrying so much quietly without anyone noticing. That's unfair." Her throat tightened. She wanted to nod, to agree, but the emotion caught in her chest. It was rare, this kind of recognition. And it stirred something long dormant inside her, a longing she hadn't fully admitted to herself. It wasn't about Daniel. Exactly. It was about being acknowledged, being understood, being noticed in a way that mattered. Yet undeniably, the intensity of the moment made her heart race. The car turned onto a quieter street, kind lined with familiar houses, the rain making the world seem distant and private. The city felt miles away, leaving only the two of them in this moving sanctuary. Emma found herself leaning back in her seat slightly, overwhelmed by the intimacy of their conversation, the intensity of his attention, the subtle electricity in the air. "I've missed feeling like someone sees me," she confessed, her voice soft but firm. "Like truly sees me, not just the parts of me everyone else notices, but all of me." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road. But there was a visible shift in his expressions, something between recognition and thoughtfulness. Then he said quietly, "I understand, and I wish more people did." The words wrapped around her like a warm embrace. She felt an ache in her chest, a mixture of relief, longing, and surprise. She had not expected to open up to him like this, and yet, once the words were out, she felt lighter, freer. The conversation flowed naturally after that. Quieter now, less confessional, more about listening, about presence, about shared understanding. Emma noticed the subtle ways he communicated, his eyes flicking to her occasionally, the soft tilt of his head when she spoke, the way he seemed attuned to the pauses, the unspoken thoughts. It was not romantic in a physical sense, not in the obvious ways, but deeply personal, emotionally intimate. She realized that this was a connection she had craved without realizing it, and it both exhilarated and terrified her. The rain softened to a drizzle as they approached a familiar turn, the streetlights reflecting on the wet pavement. Emma felt a pang of disappointment that the ride was nearing its end. She didn't want this connection, this sense of being truly seen, to disappear with the car stopping at her street. And yet she also knew that nothing had happened. There was no betrayal, no crossing of lines. Only understanding, only recognition, only the quiet pull of something unspoken. Daniel's voice broke the comfortable silence again. "It's rare to meet someone you can really talk to like this," he said, his tone gentle, reflective. "Even if it's only for a short while, it matters." Emma nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of her coat. "It does," she admitted, surprising herself. "It really does." The rest of the drive passed in quiet reflection, punctuated by soft words here and there, a shared smile, a glance that lingered just a second too long. And as the familiar sights of her neighborhood came into view, Emma felt the bittersweet ache of an ending. She had experienced something rare tonight, a conversation that touched her heart, a connection that reminded her she could be noticed, understood, even appreciated for who she truly was. When Daniel finally slowed the car near her street, he glanced at her with a quiet acknowledgement, a small, understanding smile. "Here we are," he said, soft and unassuming. Emma stepped out of the car, rain clinging to her coat, her heart still racing from the intensity of the ride. She realized, as she watched him drive away, that she would carry this night with her every word, every glance, every quiet moment of connection. Something had shifted inside her, something fragile but undeniable. And she knew, deep down, that she would never look at Daniel, perhaps even herself, the same way again. Emma's heart was still racing as the familiar streets of her neighborhood came into view. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, leaving the pavement glistening under the streetlights. She could hear the soft rhythm of the car tires on the wet road, a steady hum that seemed to match the quick beat of her own heart. The ride had been unlike anything she had expected, and now that it was almost over, a strange mix of relief, longing, and hesitation filled her chest. Daniel glanced at her as he approached her street. There was a softness in his expression, a quiet understanding, as if he had sensed the conflict of emotions swirling inside her. "Almost here," he said gently. The words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made her pause. She realized that the conversation, the quiet attention, the shared understanding, they had shifted something inside her. Emma's mind raced. She wanted to speak, to thank him properly, maybe even to linger just a moment longer, but the words wouldn't come. All she could manage was a quiet nod, her hands gripping the edge of her coat as if it could anchor her to reality. She felt exposed in the most delicate way, as though the vulnerability she had shared with Daniel during the ride had opened a window into her heart. The car slowed and stopped near her house. Daniel turned slightly to face her, his gaze steady and calm. "You deserve to be happy, Emma," he said softly. His voice wasn't commanding or intrusive. It was sincere, carrying a depth that made her chest tighten. "Don't forget that." The words lingered in the air, and for a moment Emma felt breathless. She had heard similar sentiments before, but never spoken with such quiet intensity. Never delivered with such a sense of personal understanding. It wasn't a declaration of love or a romantic advance, it was something subtler, something that reached deeper. It was recognition, acknowledgement, and perhaps even a hint of longing. Though it remained unspoken, Emma stepped out of the car, her shoes sinking slightly into the wet pavement. The rain clung to her coat, cold but refreshing. And she shivered not from the weather, but from the intensity of the night, the emotions it had stirred, and the awareness that something had changed. She turned to look at Daniel, wanting to say more, to express the mix of gratitude, confusion, and fascination that filled her. Yet the moment felt too fragile, too precise to risk breaking with words. "Thank you," she murmured finally, her voice barely above the sound of the drizzle. It was enough. He smiled faintly, a small understanding curve of his lips, and nodded. Without another word, he started the car and drove away, leaving Emma standing on the quiet street, her mind buzzing with thoughts she hadn't expected to have tonight. She watched his car disappear into the distance, leaving a trail of quiet rain and streetlight reflections behind. Emma's heart ached slightly, not from sadness, but from the intensity of the connection, the unspoken words, the fleeting intimacy that had somehow etched itself into her memory. She realized that this night, this ride, had been more than just a favor from her husband's boss. It had been a moment that touched her in ways she had long forgotten were possible. As she walked up to her front door, Emma replayed snippets of the conversation in her mind, the soft confessions, the honest observations, the quiet encouragement. Daniel had seen her. Not the role she played, not the wife, not the person who managed everything around her, but her. The real Emma, the one who dreamed, who felt, who longed to be acknowledged. And that recognition, simple and genuine, had left her breathless. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The warmth of her home, a stark contrast to the cool rain outside. She leaned against the door for a moment, letting the sounds of the house, the familiar creaks and distant hum of the heater, settle around her. But the memory of the ride, the rain, the quiet glances lingered. It wasn't a longing for something forbidden or reckless, was a longing for understanding, for a connection, for a sense of being truly seen. Emma moved to the living room and sank into the couch, her mind replaying Daniel's words. "You deserve to be happy. Don't forget that." The simplicity of this statement resonated more than any grand gesture ever could. She realized that the night had given her something she hadn't expected: clarity. Not clarity about what she should do next, but clarity about herself, her feelings, and what she had been missing. Hours later, as the rain faded into a quiet drizzle, Emma found herself unable to sleep. She thought about Daniel, about the way he had listened, the way he had noticed her, the way he had acknowledged the parts of her life that had gone unseen for so long. She thought about the strange comfort of the car ride, the intimacy of shared confessions, and the quiet electricity that had existed in their words. It was a connection that neither of them needed to define to make it meaningful. Emma also thought about Mark, her husband. She loved him, of course, but tonight had reminded her of the gaps in their connection, the moments of her life that had gone unnoticed, the loneliness she had carried quietly. She felt no anger, only awareness, a realization that she deserved to be acknowledged, cherished, and truly seen, no matter the circumstances. By the time she finally lay down, the rain had stopped completely, leaving the night air crisp and still. Emma closed her eyes, her mind replaying the evening, the drive, the gentle glances, and the quiet conversation that had touched her heart. She realized that something had changed in her, not in a dramatic way. Not in a way that required immediate action, but in a way that would linger. Something delicate, something profound, something that would stay with her for a long time. She drifted into sleep with the memory of Daniel's steady voice and kind eyes, the quiet understanding he had offered, and the realization that even brief, fleeting moments could leave a lasting impression. And deep down, Emma knew that this night, this unexpected ride home, would remain with her not as a temptation or a regret, but as a reminder that being truly seen and understood was a rare and precious thing, capable of awakening emotions she hadn't felt in years. The night had changed her. Not her marriage, not her life, not the choices she would make immediately, but her heart. Her awareness, her understanding of what it meant to be acknowledged, and how much that simple recognition could stir something deep inside her. And that realization, quiet and profound, would stay with her long after the rain had stopped and the streets had returned to their usual calm.